Lots to look forward to, lots to unpack, yet given the environment that we find ourselves in, one is somewhat caught between excitement and fear when you hear the finance minister's budget speech.
Yeah, what one does want to look for in this budget speech is not just a negative outlook, not a survival budget, but something that is basically talking productively toward an increasing an improving position within government finances as well as within the general economy. So I think it would be very disappointing if we end up with just a survival strategy. We got to have a lot more than that. And despite the fact that there is limited wiggle room for stupid plans, the question is really whether coherent, well thought through ideas are now injected into the budget. I'm not sure what we will see, but that's what we need.
Right. We've given, projections from a tech side, and everyone, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, has a specific focus. The moment they actually get the printout of the actual budget, never mind the speech, what are you looking for as the professor at Wits University? Do you go on the economic side or do you go on the tech side?
I think you've got to look at all aspects, because the budget is not just a simple expenditure trajectory or a tax trajectory. There's scope within government to spend more than that it receives. That's something that households find difficulty doing. But when you do that, you've got to do it in a way that generates economic development and growth. So I would say that on the tax side, we're in a very difficult position. We can't afford to take on additional burdens. So we've got to basically contain certain aspects of government expenditure without impacting negatively on economic growth and development. So austerity policies can be quite risky if they're wrongly configured. Because it can actually reduce economic demand, and then it will reduce how much we raise from taxes. So we've got to basically change the structure of our expenditure to generate what's often called multiplier effects, positive externalities. And on the revenue side, we have to make sure that we're collecting the revenue we should get and that we're not giving special gifts to privileged individuals. And I think that's one of the benefits we've got from changing the top structure and leadership within SARS, so that we don't lose half our tax revenue to corruption. So I think it's very important that both are focused on, and I think that the wage bill is going to be an important focus of austerity going forward, but you can't just do it crudely. You have to look very carefully at what you need to contain, because there's been a surge in expenditure on salaries and wages within government that needs to be managed now.
The professor we had in an insert earlier, that of course is the head of the Wits Business School, spoke about the size of the economy and this low growth trap that South Africa finds itself in. From your perspective, what can be done in order to stimulate that growth? How much of it is within our control, perhaps from even a policy point of view?
So it will be very important to see that we have expenditure programs that are going to stimulate economic growth. And many of these, the ones that have the most powerful multiplier effects, are the ones which have the strongest redistributive effects. So very often countries look at two aspects. They look at infrastructure spending, which tend to be very labor-intensive programs that you take forward. They don't create permanent commitments for government, but they can catalyze economic growth and development, and they tend to be focused on lower-income households who are working in infrastructure. The other part is your social security spending, in particular cash grants and social expenditure along those lines, in which incomes are directly injected into the lowest income households in South Africa. And both of those two types of expanded expenditure can have positive effects for economic growth as well as for government revenue down the line. It doesn't appear upfront that would be the case, but they would have much more powerful effects than, for instance, increasing expenditure on many civil servants who possibly aren't contributing a great deal to the economy at this point. It would be better to stimulate spending on the lower income side in South Africa. So in that respect, it would be very important to see whether that focus is going to be there. Just to note that in the infrastructural spending side, the biggest problem that's existed is that government hasn't been capable of expanding or directing infrastructural spending at scale. And that is an obstruction that needs to be removed at this point to get going. I think it's a really important feature of getting us out of the low growth scenario that we're in.
Prof, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That is Professor Alex van der Heever, who is from Wits University. We're going to continue.